Well, hello again from here at Newcastle's training ground. A very quick little update. I've been here this morning speaking to Newcastle Sporting Director Dan Ashworth about all things Sandro Tonali. A lot to unpick there, guys. I'll see you soon. Well, guys, before we head onto the streets of Gosforth 2 hours ago, I've got to jump in here with some breaking news. This is a story I've just broken on Mail Online, and that is that the FA are now investigating whether Sandro Tonali broke betting rules following his move to Newcastle. Of course, the player's agent revealed that Tonali was a gambling addict, and we understand that that was part of the mitigation and reducing his sentence, his ban to 10 months. Now, of course, that raised the obvious question of if Tonali was a gambling addict, did the betting on football stop the day he signed for Newcastle? That is what the FA are now looking at. So there's probably going to be a little bit of run on this one, as we always suspected. But nonetheless, here's what I had to say following the meeting with Dan Ashworth earlier today. And please, a little bit of a disclaimer, do forgive me, I sound like Alan Partridge during this video. Dan. Anyway, enjoy. Well, here we are on Hawthorne Road in Gosforth, only 2 minutes walk from Sandro Tonali's Wetherspoons actually, and the Italian was the subject of our conversation today with Dan Ashworth here on the back of Eddie Howe's press conference this morning, which seems a long time ago now, speaking to Eddie, and to be honest with you, a lot of what he said was rendered academic in the end. We had 45 minutes with Dan, and yeah, the crux of that was he wanted to address and he wanted to answer questions as a senior figure at the club on Tonali, on the ban, how it happened, why it happened, what happens going forward. I think Eddie has found himself in this position before with various issues, off the pitch issues, where someone more senior should speak, and I think that was the motivation behind Dan coming out to talk to us, and I think that's only right. Now, first of all, there's a hell of a lot to go through here. I will go through what Dan Ashworth said from a news perspective and then give you my take on it, and we look at where it leaves Newcastle United going forward. But first of all, just on Dan Ashworth himself. Now, I wrote a piece this morning, which I'll put in the link below, and said how Manchester United must look at Eddie Howe on the touchline and Dan Ashworth in the stands on Wednesday night at Old Trafford and wish that they had them at their club. And I used this phrase, and I meant it in the nicest possible way, but you know, Eddie and Dan, they are football squares who are taken very seriously in football circles. They've got credibility. They're very calm. They've got a class about them as well. And speaking there with Dan today, you know, he sat in a little room at the training ground surrounded by, I think it was 10 journalists, and because of the nature of what we're talking about, we're firing all manner of questions at him. I'll tell you some which I put his way, which weren't necessarily easy questions for him to answer. He admitted as much himself. From myself and my colleagues, we'll go through that in just a second, but he handled them well. He went on the record, he went off the record. He tried to be as open and as honest and as gauging as he can be. It's the second or third time we've done this with him now, and every time I've walked away and I've been really impressed by him, and you can see why Newcastle are in safe hands with him at the centre of the wheel. That analogy he likes to use, you know, the guy who's got to connect all those departmental spokes, and to have him and Eddie as the leading football faces of the club. I just think Newcastle are in such good hands. And football clubs, if they're about putting the right people in the right places, well, the two guys I've spoken to this morning there, Newcastle have got them absolutely bang on, which we cannot say about the other United, who Newcastle beat 3-0 on Wednesday night. Now, yeah, the top line from this, and there's been a little bit of reaction on social media immediately among fans who I think a lot of fans just want to read and want to see what they want to hear. It's annoying as a journalist at times. It's frustrating because, you know, I was in the room with Dan, so were my colleagues. We got the tone, we got the context, we got the off-the-record chat as well. A lot of people are lifting our quotes and just putting it out there. They weren't there. It's a nonsense really, but anyway, that's what it's become. So I'll tell you, I was there. I'll tell you what he meant by things. Now, the top line, which I've used in the Mail, is that Newcastle could be blocked from signing a January replacement for Sandro Tonali from Saudi Arabia. Now, Newcastle, 80% owned by PIF, 4 clubs in Saudi Arabia owned by PIF, where they've got a stockpile of very, very good players, some who have interested Newcastle previously and continue to do so, none more so than Ruben Neves, the former Wolves midfielder who plays for Al Hilal. He would almost be the perfect replacement to come in January for Sandro Tonali for the remaining months of the season. Now, what did Dan say when asked about this? It was the tone, it was the look on his face, and then it was the off the record later on. He said, currently, there's nothing to stop us. Currently. and I put the pause in there. I'm trying to recreate what he did. Yeah, there was the long pause. Currently, he said, but there could be something in the pipeline whereby the organisations look at related party transactions. And what Dan was not so subtly hinting at was, yes, as of now, as of today, Newcastle can go out and strike a deal with a Saudi club. There's nothing to prevent them, but he perhaps suspects that by the time January comes around, that may well have changed. So that, to us guys in the room, jumped out straight away. Go back to the takeover 2 years ago. Within a matter of weeks, there was new rules passed by the club's Premier League rivals with regards to related party transactions over commercial deals. They still exist now. Of course, every transfer has to be ratified as fair market value. That was the case when Newcastle sold Al Saint-Maximin to Saudi Arabia in the summer. But the inference from Dan earlier was that new rules could potentially be brought in with regards transfers directly between clubs who are owned, who have the same owners in effect. Now, what about TONALI in the isolation of Newcastle United? Now, from the start on this one, I've asked the question, and we've written stories in the Mail about Newcastle exploring all possible legal avenues. Did Milan know? Did the player know? Did his representatives know? At the point of sale, when Newcastle paid £52 million in July, to go back to that just a second, is this with the benefit of hindsight? Maybe, but I think there was still at the time a certain degree of surprise that a 23-year-old Italy international, captain of Milan, the player who has driven them to the semi-final of the Champions League, we saw in the San Siro what a reception he got when he went back there. You know how well he is thought of. He didn't want to leave. I think he's admitted that himself. Really, there wasn't a desire. He wasn't pushing to quit Milan, so there was a degree of surprise as to how the deal came about so quickly and why Milan were willing to sell in the summer. Then when the news of the betting investigation drops, of course it leads to the question amongst us guys and absolutely internally, did Milan know? That was a question I asked of Dan Ashworth today. Is there a chance? He said, well, he can't speak for other clubs. He can only speak for Newcastle and their own internal investigation, their own internal processes. Is there a chance Milan know? Well, of course there is, and got to be careful what I say here to a degree, but it's Italy. The bets Sandro Tonali placed go back, we believe, to 2020, 2019. How long had the investigation been? These are questions I'm asking, by the way, not statements. How long had the investigation been in the offing? Who knew what at Milan? How much did the player himself know? We don't know. Now, there's a degree of sympathy with Newcastle in terms of they're now launching their own internal investigation into due diligence. Could they have known more? Dan said, I've got to look at myself first. Could I have known more? Could I have done more on this with regards to due diligence and the whole recruitment process to avoid Newcastle being left in this situation? Now, where I've got some sympathy with them is that a gambling addiction, or any addiction by its very nature, is secretive, it's private. Sandro Tonali, at the point of signing his lucrative £140,000 a week contract with Newcastle, was never going to declare there and then that he had a gambling problem. So could Newcastle have known? Well, if you take what I've just said, the latter part there's sympathy. No, but something like this there was an investigation in the offing. There's so many players involved that the bets had to go through what we believe to be sort of an illegal online fixer. Did someone somewhere know something? Yes. Should Newcastle have got to the bottom of that? I don't know. That's what they're looking into now. These are questions and they're all being explored. Nonetheless, it has left Newcastle in a situation whereby they're without a £52 million asset for the next 10 months of the season. That just doesn't have an impact on them now in terms of it's going forward as well. What could they potentially miss out on that they wouldn't have done if they'd have that extra option in terms of Sandro Tonali as part of their squad. What else did Dan Ashworth say? Now, was Tonali in breach of contract? Yes, he was. Will his wages be docked? Dan didn't answer that, but it's certainly the inference was there was scope to. What Dan went back to every time was saying they've considered the conduct and Tonali's actions since news of this broke, and he just said that has been exemplary. They want to support the player, they want to put their arms around him. So I'm not bringing you this as solid news confirmation. but the conclusion we left with was that there is scope to reduce his wages, yes, but I don't think Newcastle would be invoking the full breach of contract, which I get the impression they would be able to. There might be some sort of compromise reached there. Tonali is able to train. I wrote earlier this week there was some confusion over the translation from FIFA. That is now being cleared up. Newcastle are still awaiting clarity on whether they can play in friendly matches though. But the good news for them is that Tonali can train with his teammates, which, as Dan Ashworth said, from a mental perspective, mental well-being, him being locked away for 10 months in Italy or elsewhere, I think would have made the ban almost doubly worse. Now, where does all of this leave Newcastle and Tonali going forward? Now, I honestly think they're just going to have to swallow this and make the best of what has turned into a very bad job and a very difficult situation. All of the questions we raised, yes, they pose some very pertinent and obvious legal avenues for Newcastle to explore. How do you prove that? How do you then pursue that going forward? I think it's extremely difficult. And the tone I detected today from Dan was that they were going to, as I say, put their arms around the player, take care of the player, almost look at it in many ways as an ACL injury, but with the added bonus of him actually being able to train, to acclimatise more to an environment in which he admitted he was struggling to adapt. So there are positives to extract, to cling to from what is a negative situation, and I just think that is what they'll have to do with regards to their own internal investigation. Again, looking back and fingers we pointed at due diligence, maybe that is for them to decide. I honestly don't know, but I just think that all they can do is put more practices in place going forward and learn lessons from this as well. In the short term, for now, what they've got to do is safeguard this season. And it's a season, this was two questions I asked today of Eddie and later Dan, was that, Dan spoke about Newcastle and Eddie as well, about Newcastle being a top 6 club. But the point I made was there's a hell of a difference between being a top 6 club and a top 4 club. A top 6 club allows you to spend a certain amount of money. You're a Europa League club. A top 4 allows you to really, to borrow Darren Neal's phrase, push back those guardrails of FFP. The money is there. The money is there. That the Saudi owners, it's the ability to spend it. And I think what they've got to prioritise now, be that through bringing in players from January, potentially from Saudi, it's clearly an avenue they're looking into, or whatever that may be. It's just making sure this season, for me, I think the absolute priority has got to be to renew that membership of Champions League football. Be that by finishing 4th, potentially 5th, of course, winning the competition or winning the Europa League. Just find a way to keep yourself as a Champions League club, not least because I'm enjoying these trips abroad with Dortmund coming up as well. Now, we haven't even spoken yet, guys, about Arsenal on Saturday. It talks to my previous point as well. Newcastle now, the next step for me is routinely and regularly beating these top teams, and I don't include Manchester United in that. We saw at the start of the season the games against Liverpool and Man City, 2 defeats. Yes, they've had moments. Newcastle, Man United victory last year, Arsenal 2 seasons ago, but really they haven't beaten the very, very top teams, City, Liverpool, Arsenal, under Eddie Howe yet. Can they do it? Yes, of course they can. You know what I think of the manager and the players. It's just about taking that next step, that belief. Now, we spoke with Eddie about that this morning. What else came from him? Yeah, I've spoken about Dan Ashworth for 10 minutes now. With regards fitness, the only slight new doubt, it seems, is Fabian Schär, who missed the midweek game because of a little bit of illness. Would expect him to be okay. Sven Botman, now this was a significant update in that Newcastle are going to wait a few weeks, see how his knee settles down, see if the issue resolves itself. If not, there is a possibility of surgery there, which I thought was very telling, because as much as Newcastle have, in the weeks Sven Botman has been out, they've done okay, they've done very well in fact in that position. Jamal Lascelles has been excellent. I don't think you can discount or downplay the impact of losing a player like Botman over a longer term, especially as these games really are stacking up. Yeah, guys, again, another weekend we go into with absolutely loads to go at. Please hit like, hit subscribe, click on the links below. It'll take you through everything Dan said about Sandro Tonali, and as well looking back at that piece which I wrote for this morning's Daily Mail, just comparing the two Uniteds, one which is exactly that, and the other, the midweek opponent, which is completely broken. And yeah, celebrating the fact that Newcastle do have, as I said earlier, Howe and Ashworth in the positions they do. In 2 short years, they've really, the owners deserve credit. They've rebuilt a football club, whereas in 20 years the Glazers have taken one to the ground. So yeah, please click and have a read on that, guys, and I'll see you again in 24 hours time from St James's Park. Okay, I'll try that again. Okay, take care, goodbye.